Harry, how long does acids can stay in the bloodstream? Because Simland says it takes amino acids to not catabolize. I'm confused. OMAD, how long? It's absolute nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Your taurine basically is a regulator of not only fluids, but also basically of motility in the body. So if your motility is fast or slow, it'll slow it down or speed it up. If you have like a lot of amino acids in the actual, we're talking about food here. We're not talking about supplements. That's a different thing, different kettle of fish. A lot of that will turn into sugar, and a lot of that the body will try to remove from the feces, or actually even piss out in the urine, because it's coming in, massive quick flux. So, and also the bioavailability is much lower. So from supplements, something like 17%, similar to plant proteins. So really need to get it from food. When you get it from food, like animal foods, it usually is the bioavailability and the utilization is much higher. So that's one thing. Two, those sort of that as the food gets broken down in the stomach, the actual, because taurine is used to regulate the secretion of the amount of acid. And as that actually is being regulated and sorted out, the body actually works out the volume of protein in there. And then it slows it down through the small intestine so it can slowly absorb it. It can take anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. That's why when you have a big OMAD meal, you don't feel hungry for hours, because you're still digesting after multiple hours. So you're getting small amounts coming in every hour. So the reality is it's a non-issue. Peristalsis can be regulated. So it's just absolute garbage in that regard. Because if that was the case, I mean, I actually said to guys on the Zoom stream, and I actually explained to them, I actually did like a mega amount of food, like a really high amount of protein, where I was just stuffing myself. I couldn't get any more. My blood, and I'd fasted for some time to see what would happen. My blood sugar dropped to 3.7 millimoles. Which is, the 4 is that sort of thing that people consider in ours. So when I actually had a massive amount of because basically you get you get a slight increase in the insulin from the amino acids that are coming in, and then it does drop off. So initially, when I did a test after 2 hours, my blood sugar dropped to 3.7, because that initial, because of leucine, muscle protein synthesis, it'll actually rise slightly insulin, then it comes down, but it actually dropped. But because I was fat adapted, not a problem. I felt energized. Fat was providing the energy. And that was basically where it was. So all this nonsense, real food does not cause any increases in blood sugar. It actually goes the other way. And the amino acids slowly are taken in by the body. It's completely and utter nonsense in that regard. So, yeah. But my ketones dropped from a fasted level of over 3 down to 1.7. But still, I was in ketosis. It, but who cares? If you're constantly eating meat, it'll actually be close to mine. Actually, now sort of moves between slightly 0.7 to slightly above 1. It sort of varies depending on when I last took it, when I was doing experimentation to see what was happening. But the reality is, it's an irrelevant. Go away. Why is this? Hold on. So yeah, it's crap. It's absolute crap. Our ancestors, that's how they ate. They'd get up in the morning, they'd get a boost in cortisol, because they would signal. They'd go out in the sun. They were out actually in the open. So pretty much once they got out of their huts, and the sun was coming up, they got the signals of the near infrared and the blue light, and it basically told their bodies it's morning. They got a cortisol spike. That cortisol basically provided them with a bit of that's the dawn effect of getting your sugar goes slightly up, providing you that energy because you're in a low, in a fasted state. Insulin is down, so you can't stop it, prevent it. So you actually get this, dawn effect. Now, if you don't go out in the morning, and this is why I say about circadian rhythms, going out in the morning and getting the signaling, you feel sluggish until you get out. You still, when people get up in the morning, they feel really sluggish and they sort of mope around the house and all that, sluggish. Had they just walked out the door, got that signaling, got that cortisol spike, they'd be energized. They'd be able to come in, wash themselves, go to the toilet, do all those sort of things and feel really energized. That's what you're supposed to. That's what our ancestors did. Then they went out hunting. They killed an animal. They brought it back. And then they, in the sort of midday to afternoon, they indulged on eating and feasting and talking about their hunt. That's what they did. And then in the evenings, they sat around a campfire, and then eventually they went to bed. And they got the signaling, that infrared, as the sun comes down, that signaling that basically to increase melatonin. That's how it works. And basically, people were consuming 1 or 2 meals a day. That's the reality of how people, and they really indulged in that, and the body will slowly digest all that. It's been doing it for a very long time. I don't see why the problem is now. Even up until very recently, agriculturalists were doing 2 meals a day. They were waking up in the morning. I know, I worked on a farm. You go very early in the morning because it's too hot to work in the sun. So you actually work until mid-morning. So you go early to bed, you wake up, very early in the morning, and you go down to the farm. You pick, because I was helping out my auntie picking tobacco, and then after that, you by the midday, 10:30, 11, you're back in the village. And actually having your first snack. At that stage, you have a snack, like you'll have some sort of drink or a snack or whatever, and then you'll have a meal where everybody will sit around and basically talk. And then in the mid afternoon, having a coffee and something like that, you'll basically just do some of the work. All the tobacco that you've collected, you'll actually put it. You'll run it through the machine that actually needles it. It's a needle threading. It's like a sewing machine that sews all of it together, and then you hang it and it dries. But that's back in the 70s and 80s they were doing that. But the thing is, then you have an afternoon evening meal, and that's pretty much it. And it's a lot, it's not a heavy meal. Farmers, I mean, city slickers, yes, they ate more in the evenings, but farmers, no, their lunch was the biggest meal. And then, and only in celebrations, or if they had guests or name days or whatever, they would do anything a bit more fancy in the evening. So people have been doing this sort of stuff for a very long time. Just because city slickers have learnt 3 meals a day and all this other bullshit for the last 100 odd years or 200 odd years or whatever, you know, that's not the way humans have been living. So this constant eating and constant, it creates oxidative damage. What do you think happens in your mitochondria? You create reactive oxygen species. Obviously, if you oxidize fat, you create less compared to carbohydrates, but all food creates some damage. All food creates. You're not supposed to be eating constantly, and you're supposed to have your blood sugars fairly low most of the day and your insulin at a more lower stage, not continually spiking it. It's just ridiculous. And the best food that can actually do that is protein. Eating protein, a big protein bolus, and actually going. So, very important. So it's absolute nonsense what he's saying. All this sort of stuff. Yes, if you, your body basically, as it's digesting all that protein over many hours, real food that is, not fake food, real food, you basically are actually building tissue. You have to basically have, and you're not, this sort of, you're only in the catabolic state if you have not enough nutrition for the day. If you have insufficient nutrition, then you're in a catabolic state. Otherwise, you're not. So you don't have to constantly eat to basically be in a non-catabolic state. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Your body's not that stupid, and it basically provides peripheral resistance to prevent catabolism because you're using your own body fat if you're not basically eating. So when you eat food, you store part of that fat. You don't use it all in that moment. You'll eat and consume some of the fat, and you'll use some of the fat, but the remnant chylomicrons go back to the liver, get exported out as VLDL, and end up as LDL, and eventually go back to the adipose tissue. Some of it gets stored, and basically the body works out how much does it need in the system. And this is why LDL goes up, because when you're not eating and fasted, your LDL goes up because you're actually pushing out more boats, of triglycerides. That's your energy. You're not energy deficient. You're only energy deficient if you basically throw in some carbohydrates at that moment, and then basically shut down hormone sensitive lipase, and basically are not able to access, and then you go into lack of energy. But that's only people that do nonsense things, well, like adding carbs. Otherwise, it's a non-issue. You know, as long as you're getting sufficient protein for the body to function, and you've got a certain amount of energy coming either in or on your body. Obviously, if you don't have enough energy on your body, you're slim, you should be eating more fat. You should be consuming more fat, you know, in that regard, because you need the extra. Your body will tell you, you'll feel hungry. You won't feel satisfied. That means you need to add more fat to that meat. So, God. So fasting for a long time takes energy from fat. Unless you actually run out of fat stores, that's the only time you're going to basically turn protein to energy. Pretty much protein, a bit of alanine in particular, which is a gluconeogenic amino acid. So some alanine, some glycerol will be used by the body for sugar, demand driven, but it won't catabolize. If you've got enough energy in terms of fat, it's not going to catabolize. It's not going to use aminos, and it's not going to catabolize your muscles if you don't have enough aminos. That only happens in vegans because basically they are running on a sugar deficit because they're not engaging the Randall cycle, so they can't fatten up, and they're basically in energy deficit, especially the fruitarians and people like that, and they end up catabolizing because they can't access fat in an efficient way. So, because they don't have it in their diet either. And so they just basically rip themselves, and then eventually they start ripping their muscles. No different than, starving people in Africa in the past did. Same thing. You basically deplete all your fat stores on your body. Then the body goes into this really hyper hungry, hyper, state. You really know, because you're in this sort of very strange, deranged sort of state of hypervigilance and all that. You're looking for anything you can eat at that stage. That's when you know you're in this sort of state of, tearing down your own tissue. And you can see it in the vegans. They become, especially the fruitarians, they become deranged towards the end. So it doesn't surprise me. They really lose the plot in every single way. So if you've got enough fat stores, it's an irrelevancy. The guy did 386 days. As long as you're getting the cofactors, that means the minerals. You don't need fat-soluble vitamins. You release those from your fat stores. You only need basically minerals and B vitamins as cofactors for enzymatic catalytic, as cofactors for the enzymes to do their job, to break things down, to build things and do all that sort of stuff. That's basically how it works. So yeah, it's pretty much a complete and utter irrelevancy that. So, our prime energy is fat, and secondary for certain processes is, I'm fully